Yeah. Wait. They're doing what? But the Germans conquered the territory. Huh. But they don't know? They don't care. Right. Okay. Wait, they're attacking the trucks. What? Yeah, okay. September 19th, 1941. It is the third largest city in the Soviet Union, and as such, a major prize. And this week, the Germans take Kiev. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Soviet Red Army beat the Germans at Yelnya. A pretty big deal. The Germans have Leningrad under siege in the north, however, and were advancing on multiple fronts in Ukraine on Kiev. On the 13th, elements of Heinz Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group approached Lochwitza from the north. Andrei Yeryomenko's Bryansk front has tried and failed to stop him, and of the 261,696 men committed to that combat, took around 100,000 casualties. Guderian is now just 40 kilometers from the tanks of Panzer Group Kleist approaching Lubna. Mikhail Kirponov's whole southwestern front, the 5th, 26th, 37th and 38th Armies, and part of the 21st, is almost totally surrounded now west of Lochwitza and Lubna and east of Kiev. They still could, in theory, escape to the east, but Stavka will not allow them to do so. I mentioned last week that Semyon Timoshenko now replaces Semyon Budeny as commander of Southwestern Direction High Command. This happens the 13th, and the first thing Timoshenko does is assure Stavka that he can, in fact, hold Kiev. That same day, Lubna and Lochwitza fall. Mitgorod falls, and the Germans begin setting up blocks in the gap between Guderian and Kleist. The Southwestern Front's Chief of Staff V.I. Tupikov radios Red Army Chief of Staff Boris Shaposhnikov that disaster is soon at hand. Shaposhnikov tells Stalin, and Stalin replies, Major General Tupikov has submitted a panicky report to the General Staff. On the contrary, the situation requires the maintenance of extreme coolness and steadfastness on the part of all commanders at all levels. It is necessary to take all measures to hold occupied positions, and especially to hold onto the flanks. You must compel Kuznetsov and Potapov to cease their withdrawal. You must instill the entire front with the necessity to fight on stubbornly. It is necessary to fulfill the orders given to you by Stalin on September 11th. Those orders were to not abandon Kiev or blow the Dnieper bridges without Stavka's express permission. On September 16th, Guderian and Kleist link up near Lochwitza, trapping the entire southwestern front, some 600,000 men, between two panzer groups in the east and two armies in the west. Timoshenko and Khrushchev do finally give Kirponos permission to withdraw, but do so orally through their chief of staff. Kirponos, well aware of Stalin's orders, says he is not going to do it until he gets it in writing. Shaposhnikov finally writes him the evening of the 17th, but says only to abandon Kiev and not to withdraw to the Psel River. Kirponos, however, has by this time finally acted on his own, ordering the 5th, 21st, 26th, and 37th Armies to attack east and try to break out. The 38th and 40th will try to protect their flanks by attacking towards Romny and Lubna. But these guys are under attack from all sides, suffering immense casualties, deprived of supplies, and without any command and control. Kirponos' forces were chopped into separated, isolated segments by the tightening German cordon. They are still fighting, however, as the week ends, but on September 19th, Kiev falls to the Germans. The Soviets have lost over 500,000 soldiers, and it might be as many as 700,000. The Germans a bit more than 100,000. We will see more about the numbers, the fighting, and the mopping up over the next couple of weeks. This is a major prize for the Germans. They may soon take another one in the north, Leningrad, the second largest city in the Soviet Union. Georgy Zhukov arrives at the Leningrad front the 13th and is now running the Soviet defense of the city. The airport north of the Neva is still under Soviet control, and starting the 13th, tons of food and ammunition will be regularly airlifted in. The situation is dire, though. The Germans are under 10 kilometers from the coast and some 15 kilometers south of the city. In the east, they threaten to take Volkov and link up with the Finns. German Army Group North Commander Wilhelm von Lieb resumes his attacks the same day that Zhukov arrives. The Germans soon advance to the outskirts of Uritsk. Zhukov thinks their flank is exposed and plans to pound them between the hammer of his 8th Army and the anvil of his 42nd. The Germans preempt the plan, though, and attack the 8th Army the 16th, capturing Uritsk, reaching the Gulf of Finland, cutting off the 8th Army from Leningrad. While this is happening, Lieb launches another series of attacks to hit the 42nd Army's left flank and destroy the 55th Army to its left. Doing so would, in fact, open the door to Leningrad. The Germans take Krasnogvardsk the 13th and Pushkin and Slutsk the 18th, which means the 55th Red Army has to withdraw to new defenses. The Germans even take Alexandrovka, which is where the city tram line ends, just 12 kilometers from the center of the city. And there, as the week ends, they are stopped. But there was plenty of action going on behind the lines as well. Partisan action. Evidence from the German Army's files in August 1941 indicates that the partisan war was not simply a problem for the rear echelon units. It was affecting the main formations at the front. Indeed, there was genuine concern at the impact of these camouflaged forces. Army Group Center has just 3 security divisions, and they are totally overwhelmed by the size of the rear area that they are in charge of. Their security area is by now around 145,000 square kilometers. That's the size of England and Wales. And even though the early partisan movement was pretty weak, they often targeted the German supply trucks that had to cross the vast open spaces, in many cases without much military support at all, and operating between the surging panzer groups and the plodding infantry ones. So they seriously worried the Germans from the beginning, attacking the weakest link in the German army, the supply chain. Most of those first partisans were Soviet soldiers that had been cut off and isolated, and though motorized units were okay for hunting them down, motorized units cannot really be spared to do so. And those rebels are getting better and better organized now, with many civilian supporters. Hermann Hoth's panzer group wrote in August, "The partisans are obviously always informed as soon as German soldiers arrive in a village. The large forest and swamp areas always offer enough cover so that finding them is extremely difficult." By September, the seeds of rebellion against the invaders have taken root. An SS report reads, "Among the population, a worsening mood has recently become apparent. This is due above all to the constant plunder and requisitioning in both town and country by the German troops. The Reichskommissariat Ostland has taken control of civilian administration, and it supports mass repression and collective farms, and this pretty handily dispels the myth of benevolent German rule and fuels the partisan fires, although still, most local populations are more concerned with survival than fighting back. But for the German troops, the perceived danger, whether from Red Army fugitives or armed civilians, was widespread enough to have a manifest psychological effect. Of course, the Soviets are not the only fighters behind the lines out there. On the 19th, in occupied Yugoslavia, Josip Broz Tito and Draža Mihailović meet to discuss the resistance. General Mihailović is the leader of the Ravna-Gora Chetnik movement, and Tito is the communist revolutionary leader of the partisans. However, Mihailović sees Tito as an anti-royalist troublemaker who wants to muscle in on the Serbian territory that Mihailović regards as his own preserve. Tito, in turn, sees Mihailović as a bourgeois representative of an already discredited officer corps. Still, the two rebel forces can and will work together to free as much of their country as they can from the invaders. There's news from another occupation this week, Japan's invasion of China. The Japanese 11th Army under General Anami Kurashika has occupied Wuhan for close on to 3 years now, and they propose to launch a campaign once again against Changsha, the Hunanese provincial capital. The general idea is, of course, to destroy Chinese strength there, but they really want to whittle down the Chinese 9th War Zone. The Chinese armies there have not had to fight for a couple years. They've beefed up their strength to the point where they have 30 crack, well-equipped divisions along the Guangzhou-Wuhan Railway and a bunch of strong defensive points. Kurashika orders the offensive to kick off the 18th. The night before, the Japanese cross the Qingqiang River at 4 points. They sweep south and at the end of the week are trying to encircle the Chinese after crossing the Miluo River. The Chinese are trying to withdraw to the Laodao and Liyuan River regions. But Kurashika is not the only one making plans. On the 16th, Otto Abetz, German ambassador to Paris, is at Rastenburg, and Adolf Hitler tells him of his plans for the East. He will have Leningrad razed to the ground because it is a poisonous nest from which Asian venom has spewed forth. The Asiatics and the Bolsheviks are to be driven from Europe, which will bring to an end, quote, 250 years of Asiatic pestilence. The new border will be the Ural Mountains. Russia west of the Urals would be Germany's India. The iron ore fields at Krivoy Rog alone would provide Germany with 1 million tons of ore a month. From this economically self-sufficient order, Hitler assured Abetz, France would have its share, but must first agree to take part in the defeat of Britain. He has more to say to his guest the 17th. The Crimea would provide Germany with citrus fruit, rubber, and cotton. The Russians would not be given any education either, for the German settlers and rulers there would run a closed society. The least of our stable lads must be superior to any native. He will have to occupy all that territory first, though. Here are some notes from other occupied territories. On the 15th, the German military administration sets up the self-government of Estonia under Hjalmar Mäe. That same day is a moving action in the Vilnius ghetto. Of 3,500 Jews moved between ghetto sections, only 550 arrived. The other 2,950 are shot at the Ponary massacre death site. On the 16th, the Allies decide to occupy Tehran, even though they told the new Iranian government they would not do so, because they don't think the Shah has done enough to throw Axis nationals out of the country. So, also that day, Reza Pahlavi, Shah of Iran, resigns in favor of his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, under pressure from USSR and Britain. British and Soviet forces arrive in Tehran the 17th. And the week comes to its end. In the east, the Japanese launch a new offensive. In the Soviet Union, Kiev has fallen and Leningrad is under siege, but the German army is having security issues behind the lines. The German troops of Army Group Center, according to Fedor von Bock, their commander, are asking just one question. When will we march to Moscow? With the reason being that they don't want to get stuck where they are for the Russian winter. As things now stood, there could only be one answer to this question. The whole war in the East was being improvised on an almost daily basis, which was the consequence of a fragmented command and competing strategic conceptions. The generals themselves did not know if or when Moscow would be attacked. One thing, however, was certain. The fears the men held of spending the winter in the Soviet Union were now assured. The army simply did not have the resources to avoid it, and the grinding daily attrition slowly but steadily made this eventuality ever clearer. If you'd like to see some of the Yugoslavian situation before the war, you can click here for one of our Between Two Wars episodes about that. Our TimeGhost Army member of the week is Runa Hartvig. Runa is not just a supporter of ours. He was also an intern with us for a while, did some top-notch research for us, and some great work on our Instagram. He's also a friend of mine, Sparty's, and Astrid's. And it's also his birthday this week, so happy birthday, Runa, you guys.
Happy birthday!
Yeah, happy birthday, Runa. We miss working with you. It was a lot of fun. And on that happy note, unusually for me, I will say goodbye for now. Do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.